Chapter 8 Home by Day. Jack could hear the flapping of wings and the sound of steady breathing. The lion flew in circles above the whirlpool. Then he soared in a great arc through the city. "We're going back now!" cried Annie. Jack lowered his head. He buried his face again in the lion's shaggy, wet mane. He didn't look up. He was too tired to think as he gave himself over to the lion's wondrous powers of flight. The lion carried Jack and Annie back through the dawn. As they glided over the calm sea, the water sparkled with light from the rising sun. By the time the lion reached the skies over Venice, darkness had turned to day. Shades of lavender glowed above the city's towers, domes, and spires. Venice was veiled in a soft pink light. The lion flew to St. Mark's Square. He glided toward the clock tower, moving more and more slowly. Finally, he landed softly like a cat on the terrace of the tower. Jack took a deep breath and stroked the lion's golden mane. Then he and Annie climbed off the lion's back. Jack's legs felt wobbly. He clutched the lion for a moment to get his balance. The lion let out a low growl. He turned his huge head and licked Jack's hand. His rough tongue felt like sandpaper. Jack laughed, too, as the lion licked her. "You were magnificent," she said. "Yeah," said Jack. "That was a great ride." The lion let out a long purr. Then he pulled away from the two of them and padded to the edge of the terrace. The lion gave Jack and Annie one last look over his shoulder. Then he leapt over the terrace railing and landed silently on the ledge below. Looking over the railing, Jack and Annie watched the living lion become a statue again. In an instant, his shaggy mane, golden back, powerful legs, tufted tail, and feathered wings all turned to carved gray stone. "Oh," said Jack sadly. He missed the living lion hiding inside the stone statue. A thundering boom made Jack and Annie jump. Beside them, the two bronze men were striking their gigantic bell. They struck it 6 times. "It's 6 in the morning," said Annie. "We were gone a long time." "Yeah," said Jack. "Hey, look at the angel weather vane now," said Annie. Jack looked up at the gold angel on top of the watchtower. The weather vane was turning in the wind. It suddenly stopped and pointed toward the west. "Remember the last lines from Merlin's letter?" said Annie. She recited it from memory. "An angel of gold will show you the way to the sea by night and home by day." "I guess now that Venice is safe, the angel is telling us time to go home," said Jack. "Yep," said Annie. Jack picked up his backpack, and he and Annie headed down the stairs of the tower. When they reached the bottom, they stepped out of the darkness into the bright morning light. Only a few puddles of water dotted the square. Carnival had ended. The people in costumes had all gone home. A flock of pigeons fluttered noisily about the cobblestones, picking at orange peels, squashed grapes, torn ribbons, and feathers. There was no sign of the flood except for some patches of seaweed. Jack turned and looked up at the clock tower. The morning sun cast a rosy light over the lion's stone body. The lion stood with pride and dignity, watching over St. Mark's Square. His great power is a secret to everyone but Jack and Annie. "Thanks again," said Annie to the lion. "Yeah, thanks," whispered Jack. Then he sighed, exhausted. "Home?" he said. Annie nodded. As Jack and Annie headed across the square, 2 sweepers were cleaning up the remains of Carnival. "Oh, wow!" cried Annie. She ran toward the sweepers. Just as they were about to scoop up a pile of trash, she snatched something from the ground. Annie ran back to Jack. "Look," she said, and held up Teddy and Kathleen's book of magic rhymes. "Oh, great!" said Jack. He took the little book from her. It was damp from the flood waters, but all the writing was as clear as ever. "We have 8 rhymes left," said Jack, "for our next 3 adventures." He dropped the rhyme book into his backpack. As Jack and Annie left St. Mark's Square, they saw Venice starting to wake up. Ordinary, everyday Venice, not the Venice of Carnival. Men, women, and children were opening stalls and putting out goods to sell. Cobblers were sitting at their workbenches, and cats were stretching in the chilly sunlight. The old man was walking his fat little dog, Rosa. He waved at Jack and Annie, and they waved back. No one knows Venice was almost destroyed by a flood last night, said Jack. And no one knows we helped save her, said Annie. They just think we're a couple of ragged clowns. Jack smiled. He'd forgotten they were still wearing their carnival costumes. Now their clown suits were dirty, torn, and soaking wet. Their hats were gone, and somewhere, in the flood waters or on the flight to Neptune, Jack's slippers had lost their bows. How will we get back to the treehouse now? Asked Annie. I don't know, said Jack. I guess we'll have to find a boat to take us there. As they scanned the waterfront, Jack saw a boy sitting at the edge of the water on a small stool. The boy was painting. Hey, isn't that Lorenzo Tiepolo? Said Jack. He and Annie hurried over to the boy. Hi, Lorenzo, said Annie. Lorenzo glanced up and smiled. Hello, Annie and Jack, he said. Jack and Annie looked at Lorenzo's painting. It showed pink light shimmering on blue water. That's beautiful, said Annie. It is only the background, said Lorenzo. He squinted at the canal. Soon I will add gondolas and people. Then probably I will add something not real at all, something from my imagination. Hey, guess what? We saw Neptune last night, said Annie. You did? Said Lorenzo. We found him far out at sea, said Jack. He looked just like he looks like in your dad's painting. We rode to him on the back of the flying lion on the clock tower, said Annie. Lorenzo nodded. I'm glad Neptune still lives in the deep sea, he said. And I'm glad one of our lions still flies. Many people believe all the magic has left our world. The magic will never leave, said Annie. Not if painters like you and your dad keep painting. Lorenzo looked thoughtful. Then he picked up his small canvas and handed it to Jack. You and Annie take this and finish it, he said. Paint what you saw on your visit to Venice. Really? Said Jack. Are you sure? Yes, said Lorenzo. You and Annie have the gift of imagination. Use it to make something magical. We will, said Annie. Thanks, said Jack. We'll start painting as soon as we get home. Hey, Jack, said Annie. She pointed at a gondola docked nearby. It looked like the same boat that had brought them to Carnival the night before. Inside were the same two people, the gondolier and the person with a lantern. Their candle had gone out, but they were both still wearing black cloaks, white gloves, and masks with bird beaks. Maybe they can take us back to the treehouse, said Jack. Excuse me, Annie called. Can you give us a ride back to the island? Annie pointed across the water. The gondolier nodded. Great, said Annie. Bye, Lorenzo, thanks. And she and Jack hurried to the landing where the gondola waited for them.